It's January 14th, 1976. Ted Turner becomes CEO of the Atlanta Braves, Italian footballer Vincenzo Chianese is born, and on television, a popular sci-fi series gets an equally popular spin-off. Welcome to That 70s Review. Hello fellow time travelers, and welcome to That 70s Review, where we look at the shows we loved as kids and you're coming to love as adults to see if they hold up. And this time we're looking at The BIONIC WOMAN. No, not that one. Please, not that one. Instead, we're looking at the show that inspired that painfully bad remake. Now, this one's going to be a little tricky for a number of reasons. Don't get me wrong, I am absolutely delighted that my viewers requested this one specifically, especially as I have some very fond memories of this show and its parent show, The $6 Million Man. Problem is, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to discuss The BIONIC Woman without discussing that earlier show, especially since Jaime Sommers' first 4 episodes are part of that series. In fact, the first episode of her show is technically an episode of the 3rd season of that show. Yeah, it's a little confusing. It also means that I'm going to be doing something that no kid in the 1970s ever did, which is to watch and review The BIONIC Woman without watching The $6 Million Man first. And yes, I'm sure we'll get to it eventually. But really, there's no easy way to do this without first addressing the cyborg in the room. We'll just do it very fast. In 1972, Martin Caidin wrote a best-selling and rather overwritten book called Cyborg. It's about a test pilot named Steve Austin, go figure, who is almost killed in a test plane crash and is rebuilt using bionics. Steve is eventually put to work for the Office of Special Operations under Oscar Goldman and watched over by his personal doctor, Rudy Wells. The book was adapted into a TV movie in 1973, with Lee Majors playing Steve Austin. Then it became an ongoing series in 1974, in which Steve works for the Office of Scientific Investigation under Goldman, played by Richard Anderson, with Alan Oppenheimer, and then Martin E. Brooks as Rudy Wells. The show was a bona fide hit, especially among kids, spawning action figures, play sets, Viewmaster sets, records, the works. But even though Steve Austin got plenty of temporary girlfriends over the run of the show, the main thing lacking was a serious love interest for him, until the end of Season 2 came along. The plan was to have Steve rekindle a romance with his childhood sweetheart Jaime Sommers, now a famed tennis star. One of the show's producers, Kevin Johnson, who would later go on to create the 2 V miniseries in the 1980s and would also produce Alien Nation, created the character of Jaime Sommers and wrote the script for the 2-parter that introduces her. For the part of Jaime, he cast actress Lindsay Wagner, based on her enthusiasm in a guest performance on The Rockford Files. Hey, that might just explain why Jim Rockford and Jaime have the same phone number, mightn't it? Lindsay Wagner would go on to become the first actress in a sci-fi series to win the Emmy for Best Actress. But not yet. Wagner would also be one of the actresses considered to play Captain Janeway in Star Trek Voyager. But not yet. The plan was to introduce Jaime, tell a tragic story, and then move on. But things didn't quite go as planned. Okay, here comes the tricky part, because we haven't had the tricky part yet, and sorry folks, it is not spoiler-free. I'm guessing if you're watching this though, you already know the story, So here goes a very condensed version of the count 'em 4 episodes that introduce Jaime Sommers before she gets her own series. Meet Jaime Sommers. Jaime is the childhood sweetheart of Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive. But he got better. Jaime and Steve get closer, and someone decides to let Lee Majors write and sing a song about her.
It always is when friends meet again. But lately it's gone flat for me, Jaime. I don't like seeing you now and then.
Ugh. At least we don't have to listen to the whole thing, right? Then Jaime and Steve go on a skydiving date, like astronauts and tennis pros do. Unfortunately for Jaime, the date ends early. Steve begs Oscar to make her bionic, and she becomes bionic. Then Jaime and Steve decide to get married. But even though Jaime wants Steve's body, Jaime's body doesn't want bionics. Steve and Jaime go on a mission, but it goes wrong, and so does Jaime. Jaime has a meltdown in the rain, and then she dies, leaving Steve Austin with 2 bionic legs, a bionic arm, and a broken heart. Aww. The end. That is, until the network got the viewing figures for the 2-parter, and they realized they needed to bring Jaime back from the dead, somehow, and quickly. But how were they going to do that, you ask? Meet Michael. Michael saves Jaime by using cryonics to freeze her brain. No, really. As for the bionics rejection, well...
It's not a problem anymore. It's not a problem anymore. It's not a problem anymore. It's not a problem anymore.
Oscar and Rudy don't tell Steve and give him an empty casket to bury with instructions not to open it. Or at least we assume they did. But Steve gets hurt and ends up in the hospital. And it happens to be the same hospital as Jaime, who doesn't remember him because brain damage. Jaime and Steve make friends and go on a mission, but Jaime starts remembering their time together, and she tells him, "Not tonight, I have a headache." Steve realizes he's the one causing her headaches, and asks for her to be sent away from him for her own good. The end. But once again, that's not the end for Jaime Sommers. It's instead an elaborate setup for a spin-off show, The BIONIC WOMAN. The BIONIC WOMAN began airing on ABC on January 14, 1976, with a 2-parter called Welcome Home, Jaime, in which Jaime returns to her and Steve's shared hometown of Ojai, California.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Jaime moves into the top floor of a farmhouse on the property of her foster parents, Jim and Helen. Her own parents died when she was young, and that will become a plot point later. Since she can no longer go on the pro tennis circuit, now that she has a literally killer backhand, she takes on a job as a school teacher at the local military base. But on weekends, and sometimes in the middle of the school day, she goes on missions for Oscar and the OSI. This show is different from the parent show in a number of ways, most notably the idea that Jaime Sommers is not some gung-ho secret agent the way Steve is, at least initially. Her adventures are a lot less action-packed than Steve's. And in this first season at least, there's as much a focus on Jaime's personal life as there is on her OSI activities, for better and for worse. Also, producer Kenneth Johnson made more of a focus on what he called pocket bionics, showing how a normal human being with cybernetic implants might actually use them on a daily basis for more basic activities. The show began airing as a mid-season replacement for 2 sitcoms, and despite not running a full 22-episode season, it was the 5th most watched television show of that season, with only Maude, Laverne and Shirley, Rich Man, Poor Man, and All in the Family beating it. It even came in ahead of its own parent show, thus ensuring that there would be a second season. But as always, the question is it worth watching? Let's take a look at some of the things that make this show still worth watching, as well as some of the things that might just make it a challenge. First of all, there's a very good reason why Lindsay Wagner won the Emmy for lead actress the following year. She is absolutely the glue that holds this show together, able to shift effortlessly from pocket bionics-based comedy to the sort of drama that one might expect from someone who's literally had her life broken into pieces and put back together again. Wagner avoids playing Jaime as a tragic figure, which could very easily have been the thrust of this show, and instead shows her leaning into her new abilities to give her a new sense of purpose. That's not to say there aren't episodes this season that don't address the Steve Austin-shaped elephant in the room, but we'll get to that. And it does help that her chemistry with Lee Majors is effective because we will be seeing them together. A lot. Lindsay Wagner goes out of her way to make Jaime Sommers a likable character. Jaime Sommers has a goofy sense of humor, which is just darling in a lead for a series like this.
Much later, please. This is one tired little girl. My legs even have metal fatigue.
She's very much the sort of teacher that you would want in the front of your classroom when you were a kid. And it really is no wonder that even a boy like me had a crush on her at that age. Another strength is that, despite the lessened dependence on physical action and violence, this show doesn't treat Jaime's being a woman as a strike against her. Steve is usually the one concerned about her more than anybody else, but it comes more from his guilt at causing her pain, not because she's a woman and therefore weaker. For that sort of misplaced chauvinism, you'd have to go look at the Charlton comics series based on the show, where it unfortunately comes across in just about every issue, generally coming from Oscar of all people.
What do you mean, me?
Well, I gotta think about your needs too, Oscar. I mean, you got a pretty big investment in your bionic woman here, kiddo. It probably cost as much as Steve did.
Oh, not quite $6 million. I mean, your parts are smaller.
Sure, she's going to be drugged and kidnapped once or twice, just like Diana Prince in the Wonder Woman series, but she's rarely in need of rescuing. No wonder Diana Prince ended up being more of a secret agent in the mold of Jaime Sommers than an actual superhero. And finally, the show has a decent supporting cast. Richard Anderson and Martin E. Brooks reprise their roles from the parent show, though their interactions with Jaime are naturally of a very different sort than their interactions with Steve. I also have to give a shout out to Jaime's foster mother, Helen, played by Martha Scott. Helen provides the sort of best friend and motherly foil that Steve only has from Oscar and Rudy, and she even ends up being part of a mission, initially without knowing it, in the episode Bionic Beauty. Honestly, what is it with these shows with female leads that they always have to have a beauty pageant episode in the first season? Unfortunately, like any first season, this one does have its weaknesses, and many of them are inextricably tied to its parent show, as we'll soon see.
Calling Jaime Sommers, this is agent number 2.
I'm trapped! Help me! It's Kenner's new travel Communicase. Batteries not included. For Jaime Sommers, the Bionic Woman, sold separately. The pretend compact transmits your voice up to 10 feet through the Bionic Woman's suitcase.
Jamie's pop! Jamie, hurry! With her bionic powers, she'll be right there.
The travel Communicase, new from Kenner, comes with all you see here. The Bionic Woman, sold separately.
You may have noticed that I haven't been able to talk about any of the strengths of this show without mentioning the $6 Million Man each time, and that's deliberate. It's not clear whether the network simply didn't think a show with a woman in the lead could pull in the ratings without some boost from the one with the man in it. Whatever the reasoning, though, this first season just can't seem to quit Steve Austin.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
Even in the episodes where he appears only briefly, it's notably to this show's detriment. He appears in no less than 3 of the first season's 14 episodes, and he's name-checked in a few others besides. Obviously, the shows are so linked that you wouldn't want Steve to be completely absent from the proceedings. Indeed, Steve will still be part of the proceedings in Season 2, but by that point this show will be just as popular as his. And yet, while the main premise of The Bionic Woman is that Jamie is formidable on her own, this first season doesn't always give her the space to be formidable on her own. It's only when we get to later episodes purposefully written for her character that she begins to reach her full potential. And that's another issue with this first season. The rush to produce a new series is so fast that the show has a bit of an identity crisis for a little while. Is it simply the $6 Million Man, but with a woman? Is it a show about a school teacher who's secretly an agent for the government? Or is it a show about a secret agent who happens to be a school teacher? While the school stuff is its own problem, as we'll see in a minute, the rush to go to series means that the scripts this season aren't all they should be. And on at least one memorable occasion, a script originally done on the $6 Million Man is essentially rewritten for Jamie. And yes, that one will be under the must-avoid episodes for reasons which will become clear. Even by the end of the season, the show is going to feature episodes that are simply odd. I also hesitate to admit that I'm not really the biggest fan of the opening of this show. Compared to other shows of this time, it doesn't quite inspire the same sort of oomph that those shows have. For example, the $6 Million Man opening, iconic. Wonder Woman, iconic. Incredible Hulk, iconic. The Bionic Woman, it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. The opening tries to be an action-oriented, suspenseful drama, much in the same way that $6 Million Man's opening is. But then the second part is downright sedate, which is not this show at all. That being said, it's a minor quibble, but it would be great if I could remember the opening of this show with the same fondness that I remember other opening sequences from the 1970s. And finally, we have to address Jamie's adventures in the classroom. Obviously, the focus on Jamie as a school teacher is meant to showcase the softer side of the character, and to show she has a personal life outside of Steve Austin and all things Bionicle. The problem is, those school kids really aren't a lot of fun to be around, especially since one of them is literally Cousin Oliver. Nothing against Robbie Rist, whose character Andrew is somewhat more likable than that other one. But the scenes, and even whole episodes, centered around Jamie's kids are really not the best. I will admit though, as a teacher myself, that first scene in which she establishes who's the boss is something I really wish I could pull off.
I guess you know what a rotten reputation this class has. The other teachers have all sorts of terrific little names for you. Guess you can be a pretty rough and rowdy bunch, huh? That's okay, I don't mind that, because it just shows me you've got a lot of spirit, and I like that. However, I am not just another substitute. I am here to stay, and if we're going to get along, you're going to learn a little bit about respect. Now, some teachers feel that the best way to get respect from their students is to threaten them. I don't like to make threats, because most of the time, they're not really carried out, you know? And I've always felt that the best way of teaching was the gentle approach. I feel that respect for a teacher should grow naturally through friendship and through trust. And I expect you to be able to develop and understand all this and have that kind of respect for me.
Yeah, that's showing the little bastards. Also, as a teacher myself, I often find I'm watching these scenes and thinking, when does this poor woman have time to grade papers, or come up with lesson plans, or deal with enraged parents accusing her of indoctrinating their kids with critical race theory? I mean, really, most of the episodes have her doing her missions on the weekends, and if I had to juggle life as a secret agent with a full-time teaching position, one of them would eventually have to go. So it's something of a relief when, by the end of the season, the classroom has been mostly phased out. All of this leads to a first season which is uneven at best. But even then, it has some episodes that are well worth watching, and more than a few that can easily be missed out on. In Jaime's Mother, a woman reveals herself to be, well, Jaime's dead mother, Anne Summers, who claims she's been in hiding since her alleged death because she was once a spy. The woman actually killed all those years ago, along with Jaime's father, was a double named Chris Stewart. Anne is on the run from enemy agents wanting her dead for, let's just say reasons and leave it at that. I can't really reveal more than that without ruining the plot, but this one is actually amazing. For one thing, we get Barbara Rush playing Anne Summers. Yes, that Barbara Rush. Her chemistry with Lindsay Wagner is tremendous. Wagner herself has such a lovely, vulnerable quality in this episode, playing a Jaime who's both overwhelmed to be reunited with her mother and resentful that this woman hasn't been in touch all these years. That, and the not-so-surprising to us reveal that Helen has been keeping an eye on Jaime for Oscar, making this an episode brimming with drama in the best way possible. And can I just say, this exchange between the thugs amuses me so much more than it should.
Hey, you want to stop for coffee or something? Nah, keep going. I want to get this thing over with.
See, if I were them, I'd have stopped for coffee. Coffee always should come before murder, shouldn't it? Obviously, the title of this one gives away part of the story, as Jaime is wrongfully jailed after being accused of selling to a foreign power an important piece of technology that she was supposed to deliver to the military. Oscar can't get her out of this one, leading Jaime to bust out, as one does when one has bionic powers, in order to clear her name. While the big reveal in this one likely will come as no surprise to anyone, that's not what makes this episode so watchable. By this point, Jaime is settling into the routine of her missions, and there's no mention of the school at all for once. We even get Kate Tanner from Alf in this one, long before she went into that Valley of the Shadow of Death. And the ending for this episode is just great. Now, it wouldn't be a 70s show without at least one doppelganger episode, wherein the main character has a look-alike who's up to no good, but this one is particularly strong. When she goes on a much-needed vacation, Jaime is replaced by Lisa Galloway, a chain-smoking southern gal who's been surgically altered to look like Jaime, even if they can't get rid of her accent.
That gal must be crazy. If I was going to the Bahamas, last thing I'd be worried about is cleaning my house.
Okay, it may not be the most convincing Georgia accent, but Lindsay Wagner's giving it her all, bless her. The expected thing for an episode like this would be for the doppelganger to take over for the whole episode, and for Jaime to come in at the very end for the inevitable split-screen scene. But this one doesn't unroll that way, and the surprises are actually surprising. In addition to featuring Battlestar Galactica's Herbert Jefferson Jr. as one of the bad guys, this is a fun episode to watch, as Wagner puts in an amazing double performance. There's also the fact that this episode will get a sequel next season, meaning it's an absolute must-watch if you plan on watching Season 2. An honorable mention has to go to Canyon of Death, which I honestly thought would suck. I mean, introducing a Native American kid to Jamie's class and having him be, well, something of a purist asshole about his Indian heritage sounds like a recipe for disaster. It also allows Cousin Oliver to be particularly racist.
You don't believe that Shaggy Bear story, do you, Miss Summers?
It's what happened.
Look, I don't know what they called you before, but on this reservation we're gonna call you Throwing Bull.
And seriously, it's not like we need more reason to hate Cousin Oliver. But the reveal that the book that this kid has based all of his beliefs on is written by a white guy turns the expectations for this episode on their head, because no one would ever be fooled by a white guy claiming to be an expert in Native American traditions, much less base their entire character on them, right? Oh, yeah. But that's a couple decades off. Anyway, and I have to admit, Bionic Beauty is actually lots of fun, even if it does use that standard trope of having the female lead end up in a beauty contest, which even Wonder Woman would later do.
Can you hear me? It's the Falcon Circuit here. Do you know where it is? Are you having any trouble?
But this season does have some episodes that, if not bad enough to be called must avoid, should at least be classified as can avoid, meaning you can do without watching them just fine. Be warned though, there are spoilers ahead. In this episode, Jamie has to spend another of her weekends doing something other than grading papers when she's asked by the owner of a local wild animal ranch to watch over it. But the local ranchers are sure that the sanctuary's pet lion, Neil, yes, that is his name, Neil, is attacking and killing their livestock, and it's up to Jamie to clear the lion's good, name. If that title makes you think they were trying to do a land-based version of Jaws, you're right. Even Cousin Oliver makes reference to it.
Hey, did you train the shark?
No, all of my animals are the four-legged kind.
Yeah, there may be a reason why so many people hate his characters. Eat him! Eat him! Sorry, Robbie Wrist. It's really a shame that this episode is such a resounding dud, given the star power behind it. Tippi Hedren, as the owner of the ranch, has moved on from birds to lions here, and she doesn't seem to be the Carol Baskin type. Though in real life, Hedren had started an organization called Roar that took in lions from various other reserves, so apart from the missing dead husband, there might be a few parallels there. We also get no less than William Shallard as Jamie's Uncle Bill, who seems more sympathetic to the ranchers than to Jamie. It should come as no surprise that the main rancher complaining about the lion tries to frame him. And yes, that's the main tension of this plot, a lion being framed for murder. True, Jamie does get to briefly fight the lion, and she even gets to use her bionics to throw a tranquilizer dart at the mountain lion who's the real culprit, in addition to scaring it off by doing, this. You know, I'm painfully reminded of that Wonder Woman episode where she used her bracelets to chase off the sharks. Frankly, this one is a really bizarre episode all around, and easily worth skipping. Now this is that episode that I was talking about, the one recycled from $6 Million Man, Survival of the Fittest, in case you were wondering. It's not surprising that the plots of the two are so similar, given that the exact same writer wrote both of them. So if you don't want that episode spoiled in addition to this one, skip ahead. Both feature a plane crashing while our hero is undercover. Both feature a friend of our hero getting injured, Oscar in the previous episode, Rudy in this one. And both have a villainous character named Bobby. Wow, that wouldn't have been too much work to change, would it? Worst of all, they both involve having another character, in both cases a self-doubting doctor in training, use Jaime's bionic wiring to cauterize a wound. Yeah, these are essentially the same story. But even if you haven't seen the original episode this one is ripping off, there's not a lot to recommend it. The twist reveal of who the villain really isn't all that surprising. And the comic relief character of Romero is simply embarrassing, in a way that only lecherous 70s men can be.
Nice legs. Oh, yes. I couldn't have asked for nicer ones if I made them myself.
At least the $6 Million Man episode got Joanne Worley to do the comic relief bit. Even worse, Romero's going to be back next season. God only knows why. I simply can't imagine that there was a Romero fan club formed after this episode clamoring for him to return in the next season. And that hot wiring bit? Yeah. The only thing this episode has going for it is that it features Christopher Stone, who will return as a regular in Season 3. And yes, we will get there eventually. In the meantime, if you value your sanity, give this one a miss. And speaking of insane, in this episode, Jaime has to play governess to a girl named Amanda, played by Christy McNichol, who is bound to show up in one of these reviews eventually. Amanda is being seemingly haunted by the ghost of her late mother, and the hauntings are disrupting the OSI-funded work of her father, played by Paul Shanar. This is actually the season finale, and it's not the strongest note to go out on. For one thing, apart from involving some pocket bionics cleaning up after one of the paranormal attacks, and then fending off a log, yes, a log, in another, the episode doesn't make the greatest use of Jaime's abilities. For another, this apparent homage to Jane Eyre isn't that well plotted. Given the source material, it's not really shocking when the dashingly handsome but mercurially tempered father gets a hankering for Jaime. And while it's also not shocking that there's no wife in the attic, and no ghost at all, as the attacks are all brought on by Amanda herself, the real shock is that there actually is a supernatural element in this story, just not a great one. There are a few other standouts in this season of variable quality, such as the third episode featuring Andy Griffith playing against type as a crusty veteran helicopter pilot. That one is worth watching just for his interplay with Lindsay Wagner. And the racing episode is tolerable, but ultimately forgettable. You know as soon as we get a racing episode that Jaime is eventually going to run faster than the race car, and that's exactly what happens. And don't get me started on the one featuring the school bus driver played by Donald O'Connor, who turns out to have been in hiding for 15 years after witnessing a murder. There are just too many damn kids in that one, for one thing. But at the end of the day, how does this first season actually rate? I'd give it 3 out of 5 tennis rackets. The main problem with this first season is that try as it might, it can't separate itself from its parent show, meaning it takes a while for Jaime Summers to become her own woman, or her own bionic woman as it were. As I said earlier, there will be a strong tie to the parent show throughout the second season, but by then she'll be a well-established character in her own right, and it won't be as much of a problem as it is here. There's also the fact that, just as with any other first season of a show, it takes a while for this series to hit its stride, although it finally starts doing so towards the end, poltergeists notwithstanding. And given how many people Jaime reveals her abilities to in this season, including at least one of her students, and the fact that she almost always uses her own name when going undercover, just how much of a secret agent is she at this point? Even with all of these factors working against it, Lindsay Wagner will make you fall in love with her and with Jaime. So while this may not be the strongest of the 3 seasons, it's still worth watching most of it. and it's definitely worth coming back for more because next time we get all of this. Yeah, it's gonna be a real blowout. Sorry. I couldn't resist that one. And that's it for this edition of That 70s Review. In the meantime, if you want to see more of this sort of thing, give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, do that thing with the bell that you do so well, and tell me in the comments what shows from the 1970s that you would like me to cover. Till next time, stay safe and stay groovy.